Start with the object, not the legend. A sheet of complaints, hammered into a church door in Wittenberg. Wood, iron, paper, that is it. No cannon, no marching drums. No giant map covered in arrows yet. Just a monk with a text, and a church doorway acting like the world's most dangerous bulletin board. If you had walked past it that day, you probably wouldn't have screamed. Yep, this will help set Central Europe on fire for generations. You'd think somebody was about to get into extremely aggressive email discourse. 16th century edition, and the list itself was not some cartoon villain monologue. It was a challenge, an argument. So here is the clean version before history turns into a shouting match. And that faith worked together with the sacramental life of the church. Protestants pushed back hard and said the highest authority was Scripture, not a human office, and that salvation came through faith in Christ, rather than through the whole heavily managed structure wrapped around it. Now add one innocent-looking piece of technology to the table, the printing press, because a complaint nailed to a door is local gossip. A complaint copied, printed, and passed from hand to hand becomes a continental infection, and this is where the dust really lifts off the tomb. The Holy Roman Empire was not one neat block with one clean opinion. What makes this opening so dangerous is how ordinary it looks. No grand finale yet, no field of corpses, because that is the part people politely summarize as religious tension, when a lot of it was plain old appetite, power, land. That split across Europe was not some neat spiritual sorting hat. England, Scotland, the Dutch, much of Scandinavia, chunks of Switzerland, and the German lands moved toward Protestantism. Meanwhile, Spain, Italy, Austria, Poland, Ireland, and much of southern Europe dug in hard for Rome. And the Catholic response was not just how dare you, full stop. It was a serious institutional counterattack. The Counter-Reformation meant courts, sermons, schools, censorship, discipline. And yes, in some places, terror. Now, shrink that giant continental mess into the Holy Roman Empire, and the pressure gets ugly fast. Officially Catholic Empire, but in practice, a patchwork of territories, loyalties, languages, and legal exceptions, and rulers who all insisted they were merely protecting the true faith, while absolutely not noticing how much more authority they gained in the process. And this cut straight through ordinary life, not abstractly at the table, in the marriage bed. Into that steps John George of Saxony, born not as some random side character, but as the eldest son in a ruling house, which means from day one, his body, his marriage, his heirs, his education, even his public piety were political assets. The question was no longer who insulted whom in Prague. The real question was who gets to control the rules of the empire, when religion, land titles, and political rank are all stapled together, like one cursed legal document. And that is where the rot lives. Take John Frederick's little career, disaster. Out of hundreds of territories he could have landed, he ends up with the one containing Wittenberg. Not just any town, Wittenberg, Luthertown, symbol city, the emotional support capital of Protestant memory. That is the system failure, right there. Nobody is only a duke, only a bishop, only a king, only a believer. Every office is doing 3 jobs at once: spiritual authority, territorial administration, and family strategy, which means every dispute multiplies. And Bohemia was built like a trap for exactly that. The kingdom was mostly Protestant. Prague itself, same story among much of the population. But the upper offices, court access, and the people leaning over the paperwork with seals and pensions. The defenestration gets remembered as this dramatic meme moment. And it was dramatic, to be fair, 0 notes. But what matters is what it revealed. Protest was no longer petition. It was the public declaration that normal channels had failed. And when Bohemia gambled on revolt, it made the classic mistake of confusing local passion with system-wide capacity. Yes, there were many Protestants. Yes, there was anger. Yes, there was memory, symbolism, and momentum. But outrage is not logistics. Sermons are not supply chains. Then in walked the Habsburgs, that dynasty-shaped octopus, with relatives in every direction and a marriage strategy that looked less like romance and more like hostile corporate merger. Their strength wasn't just big armies, though they had those, it was network power. Claims, cousins, crown rights, patronage, cash pipelines, legitimacy theater. So phase 1 ends not with a heroic standoff, but with a lesson in institutional asymmetry. Bohemia rises, believes numbers and conviction will carry the day, and gets crushed. Not because its grievances were fake, but because the old order still controlled the heavier machinery. Recognition, alliances, command, and the right to define rebellion as crime. And once people see that, they stop trying to fix the house. They start looking for stronger relatives, which is how this mess gets much, much, much bigger. Here is the weirdly modern part. Nobody in this war stayed loyal to an idea for very long. They stayed loyal to leverage, that is, the mirror, not faith. Look at Saxony. John George keeps hovering at the edge of the fire, like a man warming his hands while insisting he is absolutely not involved. First, he plays neutral, very dignified, very responsible. Then Denmark jumps in, sees an exhausted empire, and thinks, yes, this seems winnable. It was, in technical terms, not. And our boy John George sees the board moving again. So Saxony slides over, backs the emperor, helps hit the Danes, and gets rewarded, not with a fruit basket, with status. And before you make that smug little face, like, wow, these people were shameless, just pause, because this is the part where 17th century Europe starts feeling unpleasantly familiar. Was that a betrayal? Depends on where you're standing. If you're in Vienna, yes, absolutely, treason, outrageous, write that down. If you're in a Saxon village watching imperial troops forage your last sack of grain, maybe the emperor betrayed you first. And that is why this war keeps slipping out of the neat little Catholics versus Protestants box. The labels are real, yes, they matter, people absolutely believe them. But belief kept getting dragged around by logistics, prestige, dynastic survival, and the timeless political science principle of do not stand next to the guy currently losing. You can see the same structure over and over. A ruler watches a disaster, waits just long enough to see who bleeds, then rebrands the decision as duty. A territory gets protected, which somehow involves occupation. An ally gets supported, which somehow leads to new titles and border adjustments. So when Saxony flips, and flips again, don't read it as random cowardice or cartoon hypocrisy. Read it as a system producing perfectly rational, deeply destructive choices. In a world where one wrong commitment could get your lands flattened, consistency becomes a luxury item. Survival marries opportunism, and together they call themselves statecraft. That is the ugly mirror. Once institutions reward flexibility more than conviction, people stop asking what is right and start asking what is survivable. And once that happens, every new army marching in can still claim to be the cure, while carrying the next round of plague in its baggage train. So tell me honestly, if you were John George, watching Bohemia get crushed, Denmark fail, and Sweden suddenly look unstoppable, would you call it betrayal to switch sides? Or just the only sane move left? This is where any clean good guys versus bad guys reading just falls apart. Because once France jumps in against the Habsburgs while still Catholic, the mask is off. Officially, everyone can keep saying holy words. This is now a war about who gets to dominate Europe and control trade routes. It is about borders, dynastic leverage, tax flows, and that giant political headache, the headache formerly known as the Holy Roman Empire. Religion didn't disappear, it just got shoved into the passenger seat, while power grabbed the wheel and started speeding. And from a modern angle, that matters a lot. Because when John George flips, stalls, bargains, and plants himself for survival, he is not some weird historical glitch. He is what politics looks like when institutions fail, and everybody starts calling self-interest principle with a straight face. We still do this. Governments still dress up strategic fear as moral necessity. Leaders still say security, stability, tradition, and values. And somewhere underneath all that polished language is a hand gripping the ledger. Who pays, who profits, who gets occupied, who gets buried. Look at Saxony on the ground, and the verdict gets harsher fast. Burned territory, armies trampling fields, food gone, revenue collapsing, villages emptied out not by ideology debates, but by boots, fire, and disease, and people simply running out of things to eat. The court can keep talking about alliances. The peasant sees a barn without grain and a road full of soldiers. That is the modern judgment here. If your political flexibility only works for the people in silk, while everyone else gets famine and smashed homes, it is not clever statecraft. It is just elite survival with nicer handwriting. And John George staying put doesn't suddenly turn him into a tragic hero either. If anything, it makes him look more trapped. Earlier, switching sides could still be sold as maneuvering. Now even that trick stops working. The board has changed. Bigger powers are moving pieces across him. Sweden is still dangerous, and France enters like a man kicking open the saloon doors, announcing that the continental balance of power is now everybody's problem. Saxony gets rolled anyway, so here is the ugly present-day reading. Leaders often think they are making decisions, when in reality, they are just choosing which catastrophe arrives first. And then there is the drinking, an easy joke, an obvious historical layup. Beer George, the guy allegedly putting away absurd amounts of alcohol. Like he is trying to personally end the region's supply chain. Funny nickname, horrifying subtext, because if we strip away the tavern story comedy, what do we actually see? A ruler under military, political, and dynastic pressure, facing territorial losses, economic collapse, and public suffering. With no real control over the storm anymore, today we'd look at that and say, this is not quirky. This is a man unraveling in public while still holding office. That private vineyard stop starts to read less like aristocratic leisure, and more like retreat, avoidance, and sedation with better scenery. His wife sees it, which honestly tells you everything. Courts can normalize almost anything if enough gold embroidery is involved. But the people living in the room with you know the truth. They know when the joke has stopped being funny. Weight gain, spiraling consumption, stress curdling into habit. The modern verdict is brutally simple. A collapsing system doesn't only destroy cities, it leaks into bodies, into sleep, appetite, nerves, marriage, temper, and dependence. History likes to record treaties, but real life records symptoms. So if you judge this era from where we stand now, the sentence isn't that these people were irrational about religion. That is too easy, and also wrong. The sentence is that once political systems reward opportunism and punish restraint, and let ordinary people absorb all the cost, everybody starts behaving in ways that look insane up close, but make cold sense inside the machine. And when that machine keeps grinding, even the men at the top start looking less like masters of history, and more like its next casualty. So tell me honestly, when a ruler starts drinking through a collapsing world, do you read that as personal weakness, or as the clearest symptom that the whole age was already sick? And here is the really bleak punchline. Nobody actually learned. They just changed the furniture, updated the paperwork, and called the nightmare diplomacy. Puh, and yes, the fighting stopped. The signatures dried on the Peace of Westphalia. Wax seals, polished tables, and men in expensive clothes congratulating themselves. For ending a catastrophe they had spent 30 years feeding. On paper, it looked civilized. Borders were adjusted. The Habsburg grip weakened, and France came out stronger. Switzerland and the Dutch Republic got formal recognition. Sweden collected territory like a winner cashing out chips. At the end of a rigged casino night. If you only read the treaty, it almost sounds neat, orderly, mature, very statesmanlike. Then you step outside, and the real invoice is waiting in the mud. Burned farms, empty villages, church bells with no one left to hear them. Fields gone wild because the hands that used to plant them were dead, drafted, missing, or buried in plague pits. In many German lands, the loss was so vast. It didn't feel like defeat or victory, it felt like subtraction. A whole generation erased by steel, hunger, and fever. And men in uniforms who always had a reason. Why this raid, this tax, this execution was unfortunately necessary. That is the part history keeps doing. By the way, the people at the table announce a new era. The people under the table count the bodies. And John, the drunken boy who seemed like comic relief, in the middle of civilizational collapse, he somehow does not get a poetic punishment. Of course not. History loves bad jokes. He doesn't dramatically drink himself into an early grave. He keeps going, gets older, gets heavier, makes it to 71, which in that century is practically cheating. Meanwhile, the empire around him keeps loosening at the bolts. That giant patched-together machine of titles, loyalties, and holy pretensions. Not all at once, that would be too clean. It just decays slowly, one crack at a time, until the future can finally admit the thing was already dying. And that is the curse. Not that one foolish man drank too much. Not that one war got out of hand. It is that humans keep building systems that reward the exact behavior that ruins them. Dress greed up as principle. Dress ambition up as security. Dress slaughter up as stability. Then act shocked when the map changes, but the script does not. The weapons improve. The bookkeeping gets sharper. The slogans get modern. Now, it is not a prince demanding grain from a starving village. It is a state, a market, an algorithm, a supply chain, or a sanitized press statement. Same hunger, same ego, same ability to explain why ordinary people must absorb the cost of somebody else's grand strategy. That is why this story never stays in the 17th century. The clothes change, the paperwork goes digital, the sermon becomes a broadcast, then a feed, then a notification buzzing in your pocket, while somewhere, someone in a conference room explains that the collateral damage is regrettable but unavoidable. The war ended, but the curse didn't. So if you had to pick the modern version of this cycle, the place where we're using shiny new technology to reenact a very old disaster. What would you name first?